What's up, guys? My name is Ethan Bishop. I'm the president of the WSU Democrats, and this is the first podcast of the semester. Super excited. We're so ready to just spit facts and logic. So, yeah, who wants to introduce themselves first?
My name is Zara. I'm majoring in political science, so political science is a big part of what I do.
I'm James. I'm a sociology major. I'm here to contribute to the discussion and listen in.
I'm Vaughn. I'm a cybersecurity major. So I just do a lot of this research in my free time.
Nice. Yeah, and I didn't say I'm a philosophy major. Very recently converted from history to philosophy because history is too much reading. I don't like it. But I just kind of wanted to start this off by going through some bullet points kind of about Trump and some of the things he does, because especially now, like in the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk murder, it seems like a lot of people just put on MAGA hats and they don't fully know what they're supporting, or they think that what they're supporting is foolproof and that there's nothing wrong with it. And I just think that many of these things are almost objectively wrong, so I don't see how they could hear these and then say, oh yeah, I'm a proud Trump supporter. So Trump, he's not just bad, he's wrecking democracy. He's consolidating power, sabotaging institutions, and straight up authoritarian vibes. Signalgate, do y'all remember that? That was when Trump's team leaked classified military operations in a group chat. There's the Epstein files cover-up. Pam Bondi said that Epstein files were on her desk and that they're ready to be released, and then nope, they don't exist. There's no incriminating client list, nothing like that. And they lied and hid them because it probably implicated Trump. They wrongfully deported Kilmar Abrego Garcia despite a Supreme Court order. Mass deportations equal families ripped apart, asylum seekers ignored. They're ignoring court rulings, which is a constitutional crisis. He pardoned the January 6th insurrectionists and gave Ashley Babbitt's family millions in taxpayers' money, and that just pisses me off because Ashley Babbitt is the woman who got shot. I think she got shot in the neck, actually, when during the January 6th insurrection, she was trying to break through some glass to get to members of Congress. So literally the last line of defense before they would get to the members of Congress. So she was breaking through and climbing over the window, so she got shot. And then, of course, Trump now pardons January 6th insurrectionists, gives her millions of dollars in taxpayers' money. Do y'all want to pay for some insurrectionist family who got shot because they were about to attack people? It's like, doesn't make any sense. But and the GOP in Congress, they're totally submissive. They have zero checks on Trump. He has weaponized the DOJ. They literally targeted Act Blue, which is the Democratic, form in which they get their donations from, but they ignored Win Red. They didn't investigate the Republican version of it, just the Democratic one. You can't even make this stuff up. They arrested a judge to send a message. He ordered Texas to redraw maps mid-census, which is voter suppression. Groveling to Putin, he tried to hand over Crimea. He blocked a UN vote condemning Russia for the war in Ukraine, siding with the aggressors. He sent troops into U.S. cities, militarizing our streets. He slashed $1 trillion from Medicaid. Hospitals and disabled people are at risk, which particularly hits home for me because I work with disabled people. That's how I make a living. And, it's just absolutely disgusting wanting to take resources away from literally our most vulnerable members of our community. And that's what it affects. And the whole anti-DEI thing, that affects people with disabilities as well. All right, where was I? Tariffs, insider trading for elites. 125% tariffs on China, which is a hidden tax on groceries and electronics. He threatened to annex Canada. He fired nuclear security officials without knowing what they did and then tried to bring them all back. He gutted the FAA amid a bunch of plane crashes spiking and lives being lost. He has instigated a war on abortion rights with funding bans and a global gag rule. He pulled out of Paris Climate Agreement on day one. He rolled back pollution protections, poisoned air and water, and Congress is completely spineless, and Trump just runs wild. And I could just go on and on. Jimmy Kimmel suspended after he criticized Trump supporters over Charlie Kirk's assassination, and then after pressure was on it, Jimmy Kimmel has then been reinstated. So sorry, I didn't mean to get on a soapbox like that. I just kind of wanted to go through just some basic things. Anyone have any ideas on that or anything you'd like to contribute at this moment?
I'm glad Jimmy Kimmel came back.
Yeah.
I think that was very, very dangerous for free speech.
Yeah.
A huge threat. And I see a lot of clips of other late-night shows just still calling out the administration and not holding back at all, which is really good.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I agree. I'm glad that he came back. I think that this is not one of the only cases we are now seeing of suppression. We're seeing journalists get their, ability taken away from going inside the Pentagon and getting information there. And I think that's pretty interesting that a lot of this stuff is happening. I feel like a lot of the bigger things are happening so that we're not paying attention to the smaller things that are happening, the smaller injustices that are slowly becoming more and more prevalent as we continue.
I very much agree with that. I believe that it's really easy to see this as a limelight case, but there are plenty of other less than limelight cases where these kinds of instances of curtailment on the freedom of speech occurs. We can think of activists centering on the Gazan genocide right now to be one issue that we can think of, where activists are being taken, where protests, for example, are being shut down, even in states such as California.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. And I love what you said as well with the Department of Justice, or not the Department, the Pentagon, because now they're saying you can only report on information that has been approved by the government. It's like, what do you call that? That's government state media. You already had Stephen Colbert get booted because there was a merger they wanted to do, that Paramount wanted to do, that would have needed basically presidential approval. So then they say the ratings are in the trash, which they're not as far as Stephen Colbert went, and then they just ended that. I thought for sure, because they still haven't brought back Stephen Colbert, I thought for sure that was going to happen with Jimmy Kimmel, but nope, they brought him back. So that's one thorn in Trump's side, because he was like, oh yeah, they got Stephen Colbert, now we need Jimmy Kimmel. He got Jimmy Kimmel, or at least he thought, and then he's like, yeah, and then what's the other one, Seth Meyers, or there's some other ones. But no, that threw a wrench in his plan, which is good, because yeah, for a second there I was really like concerned about this, and I was watching a video about these experts on fascism who are leaving the U.S. who said that fascism, it doesn't happen in one big jump, it happens in steps. And that's what we're having when you have, you need to have government confirmation to report on any information. Like, you can't criticize Donald Trump without him trying to get you put off the air. And even during his first administration, he tried to weaken libel law so he could literally sue journalists for talking shit on him. It's like, what the fuck, bro? Like, come on. Like,
yeah, I think the biggest issue is fake news in general. Because when he's already to the point where he controls what the masses think that support him, right? And if you go to anyone who supports Trump and you bring up a credible argument and facts to back up your claim and everything, they will do whatever they can to just, say that's not true, or they don't want to believe you. And I think that's such a big issue, because they just watch Fox News, no other news sources. They don't look into anything, do their own research. They just hear things as they are and they believe it.
Preach, exactly. I mean, like with the Trump supporters, a lot of them, you just can't really reason with them. They're just on a completely different wavelength. If you say, oh yeah, Trump is in the Epstein files. No, he's not. He kicked Jeffrey Epstein off, or he got kicked out of Jeffrey Epstein's party, or whatever they say. They literally say, like, yeah, I know they were friends, but they had a little skirmish, and then Trump didn't really like him because he was wanting to be with young girls, yet now we have that letter of a young girl, with all that, I don't want to describe it too fiercely, but it's, yeah. And the Trump supporters, we just need to operate on the same ground of logic and facts. And this is why I think sometimes I honestly like Ben Shapiro more than some other right-wingers, because one thing he said, like, he doesn't completely go off and say, oh, well, all of this is bullshit, like the election is rigged, or like anything like that. He even agreed during the election that Trump was a loose cannon. He just said that, oh yeah, I think that the system will hold him. So we have our checks and balances. Yeah, he'll try to become a dictator and all that. He doesn't think that he'll become a dictator because of that. So there he kind of has mental gymnastics and that sort of thing, but he's still acknowledging that Trump's out of whack, whereas normally the Trump supporters would just be like, oh, a dictator? No, he's a president of freedom. He's the greatest president ever. Like, so it's kind of interesting. I wish more right-wingers would just have a solid basis in reality. And that's also why I'm kind of encouraged by the president of the WSU Republicans, who I actually haven't met yet, but he had posted something on Instagram. I was just telling Zara about this before, with the Minnesota murders of the state House Democrats, or one was a state senator, but he survived. How Mike Lee posted "Nightmare on Walt Street" and then a picture of the murderer, literally with the mask on. And the president of the WSU Republicans, he demanded that he resign for that. I went and saw that Instagram post, and I was really encouraged by that. So I hope that, we can kind of have a relationship with them and maybe even build up like some agreement. Like, yes, this is our factual basis. It's things like the election wasn't rigged. There's not a big cabal. QAnon is not real. It's like if we can just start agreeing on those, then the rest will be so much easier to just debate and hash out. But yeah.
This is why I think it's important to think about structural concerns. It's very easy to look at things from an individual perspective and say, as long as we, in terms of discourse, come to this. But a lot of things occur outside of discourse in terms of words, in terms of how structures of power are associated and how they, relate to people. And so many of these things, I believe, are partly beyond discourse. It's just beyond logic, beyond reason. And for a point, it's largely due to person's socialization, a person's family ties, it's a person's entire worldview, and this is not necessarily something that finds basis in reason and thought. It finds more basis in faith. It finds more basis in sentimentality, emotions, and so on. And it's through structures of power that prey upon these sentiments, where reason and thought is, thoughtful, meditative thought isn't necessarily encouraged. I would encourage us to look at these from systems instead of in terms of events or discourses, how there are systems of power that encourage this mode of thinking instead of discourse.
I feel that. I think discourse is a part of it, though. I mean, yes, a lot of it is kind of how they were raised, and a lot of it they're not going to be changed by discourse. But then again, I think there's enough that it's worth trying to change who is able to be, captured with that. And just to be able to agree on that, I just still think it would be good. It would be a step in the right direction, because if us and the college Republicans agree the 2020 election wasn't rigged, and then that's part of it, it's like it becomes much harder for them to then say many other equally as bad things or as unfounded things. But I totally agree with you. It's not the whole thing. If anything, it's just one of the only tools I feel like I have. But yeah, we should definitely do more than that. But.
It was interesting when you mentioned checks and balances, because it makes me think about how Hitler originally came to power to begin with, and it was through a democratic system. He was voted for. He played off of the ideas and the sentiments that the country had already had, if not quite as extreme. And like you said, this happened slowly. This was not something that, one day they just decided to kill all the Jews. It was a slow, gradual process. So a lot of times people don't realize authoritarianism or fascism happening up until it's too late, up until it's so violent that to get back, you have to sacrifice a lot. So for the early, warning signs of fascism, when people say, hey, you're over-exaggerating, this is exactly what early fascism looks like.
Exactly. The Charlie Kirk murder, basically. Yeah. I kind of wanted to discuss that and what we think about it, because in the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk murder, Donald Trump and Pam Bondi has said that they're going to go after hate speech and acting like that's a different form of, like that's not part of free speech. That's a completely different section that should just be taken away. And that they should investigate it. And then when Trump was pressed on it by a reporter, like, oh yeah, is there another categorization of speech called hate speech? And he said, oh, well, since your company had to pay me $16 million, which they did, on a case which if they kept fighting, they could have won just because they wanted to appease Trump. They just blew it. And he said, oh yeah, well, we are going to go after hate speech. And it's like, we should go after you, basically, to the actual reporter. And it's interesting because I also saw a clip of Charlie Kirk where he said that they shouldn't be prosecuting hate speech. Hate speech is part of free speech. That's not a reason to go after someone. And then they're using his name and what he believed to justify something that he didn't necessarily believe in. So, I mean, what do you guys think about that?
I think I have a lot of thoughts on what happened with Kirk. I think what most confuses me is that we're not talking about some other cases I've heard of a black man in Mississippi getting hung at his university. And somehow that's not getting near as much coverage as the Charlie Kirk assassination, which I understand it's a big deal. It happened on TV, but I do think it's interesting that, you know, there's like obvious hate crimes happening now and more prevalent than ever before. And we're still focused on, you know, a right-wingist getting shot. Although, you know, also a few months ago, there were 2 Democrats that got killed. And nobody talks about that either, right? So why is the narrative always on one side? And I think that a lot of times, sometimes Democrats might even fuel it. Instead of giving it as much attention as they want it to have, we need to bring attention to the issues that actually matter, the cases that really matter.
Yeah, totally. And by the way, I'm talking about Charlie Kirk. I'm not necessarily saying that he's this big, like, loss in terms of compared to, like, the school shootings and everything happening. I'm just talking more about just the overall discussion around hate speech and everything around it as well. Totally agree with you, though. They need to focus on school. I think on the day of the Charlie Kirk murder, there was, like, a few school shootings that just did not get any attention. Which, I mean, political violence, sometimes you could say it's uniquely bad because, you know, it really could happen on both sides, and it's more like, I don't even know how to describe it. I guess it's more remarkable, and it's more of like a spectacle. That's not to say that it's justified that it gets more attention. I think it shouldn't.
You know, the people that that are getting mad about anything you say about Charlie Kirk, any joke, any, you know, basically anything that's not saying my condolences, it's so sad. They get so upset about that, but these are the same exact people who will respond to tweets about children being massacred in Gaza and say bye-bye Gaza, or make jokes about that. They were the people who made fun of the George Floyd murder the day that it happened. These are the people who, you know, like that guy that you said that should be, the one council member said he should be removed from office for tweeting the Nightmare on Wall Street.
Oh, yeah.
You know, people like that, they do the same exact thing, and then when anyone says anything bad about Charlie Kirk, they get so upset. And it's the only reason it's getting so much attention compared to, again, what is really important is because it finally happened to a white man, and that's why, you know, everyone's freaking out about it. Now it's one of them when it's been, you know, other demographics for so long, but now it's one of them, and now they get upset.
Yeah.
I think it was also interesting when I saw protests in California of protests of white men fight back. Before they knew who the killer was, I think that they desperately wanted some kind of race war, some type of, you know, minority war, and then they realized that the shooter himself was also a right-wing extremist, right? And there's even some people making, you know, comments about how, you know, killing somebody that has an opinion is fascism. But who did the killing, right? This wasn't somebody, a Democrat. This wasn't a minority. So I don't know. Why did it automatically fall to racial violence? And I think that's like a big part of their platform. And of course, they're not going to admit I'm racist. They're going to say that's just how it is. But for us as intellectuals, we know what's happening. It's very obvious when they come to these conclusions without even knowing who the shooter was.
I think as fascism thrives in violence and fear and anger, and when something like this happens, they see that as an opportunity to, you know, further their agenda and create more fear and more anger and blame the other side as much as possible before they even know what the person looked like.
I believe it's a pretext for what they're already intending to do. It's not even, I mean, it is an opportunity, but it's a planned opportunity. Which is why, to me, it's no surprise that there's such a big gala going on with all these sigils happening. And particularly the thing, if we want to point out a contradiction, is thinking about Erica Kirk forgiving the person who, you know, killed him. And in this regard, the question I have is, would this happen with any other demographic? Would this happen if this person was not white, if this person was not likely, you know, allegedly, presumably straight, and so on?
You're saying if the shooter was, or if the shooter was any other demographic? Oh, okay.
Would Erica Kirk and others be so willing to let this go.
That's a good point. I think that's true because there is, I think it was Nancy Mace, how she was saying that, oh yeah, the Democrats own this, and then she was also saying that like all these things about the suspected shooter, but then when it came back that he was white, she was like, oh, we need to pray for him, we need to do all this kind of stuff. It completely changes. Like, and thank God it was a white person, because if it was like a black person, like, bro, dude, that would be insane. Like the amount of unfettered racism we would see if that happened. It's crazy. And it's crazy how it's always white people who often have some sort of roots in conservatism. Like how, isn't his name Tyler Robinson, how he dressed up as like Pepe the Frog, and he did all this stuff where it's like he's clearly in this, online rabbit hole, if nothing else. And yeah, I kind of forgot what I was saying there. But
I think it's not just crazy, it's precisely for structural reasons that this country was founded by white enslavers who prioritize their interests over the interests of other people. And so when the law, prioritizes people who are white, people who have property, for people who have capital, it should be no surprise to us that there are certain demographics who are legally and structurally at a deficit.
This, I guess, adds to a little part of it, but just America's recent, or not so recent, loss of democracy, our functioning oligarchy as it is today. I remember starting to really get into oligarchy a couple months ago, and I wanted to really understand what it is and how it came to be. I came across this study by the Harvard Kennedy School. It was a study by two political scientists, one from Stanford and I think another from an Ivy League school. Basically, they went over thousands of cases over 30 years and found that the way that policies are made are primarily only made through the vision of the elite, and that people have little to absolutely no power in what is happening. And I think that's interesting because I've never seen an article on America's loss of democracy. I mean, the study found that America is not a democracy anymore, but a functioning oligarchy, and has been for over a decade. But I've never seen that talked about. And I think that's something really important to talk about, right? Like, a true American wants America to be the land of the free, to have democracy, to have power to the people. And we just lost one of the most crucial things of what being an American really is, what America's supposed to be, right? We spread these ideas of democracy across the globe, or at least tried to, right? But then we can't even hold it ourselves. And now we're a functioning oligarchy. We have oligarchs controlling every aspect of our government. And where does that leave us? What do? Do we continue to fight this, political war when we know that it's a class war going on right now? Or do we continue to kind of feed into this narrative until it's too late and we can't do anything about it?
Preach. Yeah. And I totally agree with that. I just saw earlier how, I think it was like correct me if I'm wrong, like the 5 richest people or whatever in the world are all media heads or executives and that sort of thing.
I saw that, yeah. So
not only is our news and all the money is all combined onto one small little group of people. You have the small group of people determining what's right, what's wrong, who gets fired, who doesn't. It's like you see the thing with Jimmy Kimmel. What if they just agreed to just never bring it back on, and then they actually did go after the other late night hosts? Like, what if they did that? So very, very important stuff here, and that's why I love that. I hope that they started up again. Bernie and AOC did the Fighting Oligarchy tour, which I like that he was kind of bringing attention to that sort of thing. But yeah.
I think people also forget that there's 6 media companies that own all of media in America. So whether you're watching CNN or Fox News, these are the same companies pushing the same agenda. And I think that people forget because they want to point fingers so much on one side or the other, but I think that they're missing a lot of the bigger picture. I don't think this is just they want us to fight amongst each other. If we fight amongst each other, we're not paying attention to the people we really need to focus on. So this is exactly what they want.
You mentioned the class war, and there's in the sociology of law, there's a concept where this is largely due to power imbalances, where you have large legal firms who have the capacity with lots of people, lots of money, to be able to I'd say, intervene on particular cases that they determine to be to their benefit, and in this way that through people who have more power, who have more money, compared to people who don't have money, don't have power, law over time is able to be better to be swayed toward people in power over the average person. And this is one way in which law is leveraged for those in power against those who do not. But the other thing I told you I'd push back a little bit.
No worries. Go ahead.
This is an opportunity to push back a little bit. We talk about being a democracy. Yeah, the question I always think about is, democracy for whom? As a history major, you probably might be well aware of the history of the United States and how the democracy wasn't always extended to all, whether it's women, whether it's, propertyless men, whether it's Catholics, whether it's particularly, I think in this context, Native Americans, who, and still to this day, and for many, many reasons, do not have many of the same fundamental rights as Americans do. And there's this whole question of whether to include that, whether to let them do their own thing. I don't want to touch upon that. But at the point I want to get across here is, we say we have this type of democracy, but a democracy for whom? And that's the question I want to get back to the glass war here. And I want to say that it's always been a democracy for the people who have power and over the people who do not.
I agree. I don't think it ever has been. I think it's more of a hope, right? You grow up an American and you hear the things about what America is supposed to be. It's supposed to be the land of the free, true democracy, equality. I mean, like all of these like great things that you grow up thinking, wow, like I love living in a country like this. And then you slowly find out that this isn't the case and there isn't equality and, this isn't what a democracy should look like. I agree. But I do think that the difference between a patriot and a nationalist is a patriot loves their country so much that they're willing to change things within their country to get it to where they want it to be. And a nationalist is somebody who will continue to defend their country regardless of the mistakes it makes, regardless of the problems it causes, and will just stay strict on loving that country regardless. And I think as a true patriot, I want it to be this great thing, this great sense of equality and democracy. That sounds like a great idea. And I would love to have that myself.
I really like that comparison. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, me neither.
I do think it also touches on a book I've been recently reading called The Great Leveler by Walter Scheidel. He's a historian from Stanford University. And it's basically violence in the history of inequality from the Stone Age to the 21st century. And he does an analysis on how great economic disparity has ended throughout history. And that he's gotten to 4 horsemen, basically, which is warfare, revolution, state collapse, and pandemics. Now, this all stemmed from me hoping, right, optimistically, that there would be a way that we could peacefully resolve oligarchy or great economic disparity. It seems throughout history that that's not the case, although I wish that, we still come up with some type of peaceful way. But I'd also argue that during the pandemic, it actually made the situation a lot worse. If you read any of the studies, all of these ultra wealthy, all of these elite got 2 to 5 times the amount of money they had originally. Don't quote me on that. I don't remember the exact statistic. But I think that we can rule that one out. So really it leaves us with 3 options, and that's warfare, revolution, and state collapse. Obviously, state collapse is at least the least violent. So of course that's what everyone's going to hope for out of the 3. But I just think it's interesting that it's the same as World War I, World War II. I mean, the amount of warfare that happened, it leveled the playing field. Exactly what the book says. The rich just have more to lose. It doesn't mean that the poor aren't also suffering, right? It just means that the rich have so much more to lose that now they are leveled with the poor. And I think that it's an interesting idea that I think we need to take up upon, because I think that a lot of democratic narrative and left narrative has lost its true purpose of what it's supposed to do. And instead now there's a lot of finger pointing going on instead of looking at, what is the real root of this issue and what can we do to solve it, right? Because talking, right, we want to educate people and we want to have a discussion. But at some point, we need to actually do something. If we continue to just hope and talk, nothing's going to happen. And instead, our history is that we're thinking that we're good people and we're hoping for the best, and then we do nothing about it. Seems all talk to me. And I think we just need to focus on economic disparity more, because I think this is where the root cause of a lot of issues we are having in our political sphere today come from.
Good point.
I think that boils down to the Charlie Kirk murder, that whole situation as well. Like, from the president, you would expect after the whole thing some form of unity, talking about coming together and figuring out how to prevent this. But instead it was just blaming the radical left lunatics, which was not even true. And, you saw posts from Obama, Bernie Sanders, Gavin Newsom, they were all talking about unity, and they were not pointing fingers at all. And a lot of these, GOP people, they hear about school shootings and stuff, and all they say is thoughts and prayers, and that's it. They don't go for any new legislation, or you talk about taking away their guns, and that's suddenly more of an issue than innocent children being killed.
Preach, exactly. One thing I want to say is, and I was kind of pushed back, not really, but only a little bit, like about the kind of narrative that Democrats haven't done anything. I think there's a lot of criticism of Joe Biden and the Democrats and all that, and they could have done a lot more. I think there's even more criticism to be levied at Obama when he had 60 Senate seats, and they could have codified Roe v. Wade. They could have, passed a bigger healthcare bill than even Obamacare. They could have done a lot of different shit that they just didn't do. Whereas with Biden, I think you actually did see some pretty remarkable changes, at least as far as way more than you would have expected. Like, you had largest gun control legislation bill in 30 years. You had the largest investment fighting climate change ever. You had the infrastructure bill. You had the CHIPS and Science Act. You have all sorts of things. I do think that he should have probably done more executive orders, and he should have been more aggressive with it, in my opinion. And I think if he would have been more based and actually helping people and focusing on income inequality and all that, then he would have had a much better, he might not have even dropped out of the race if everyone was like, oh yeah, you're based, we like, Dark Brandon and all that kind of stuff, if you remember that. But yeah, I totally agree. The left needs to be doing more. I just think it's also important to acknowledge that there still has been some progress. So it's not like the whole thing, it's not like throw the baby out with the bathwater, just make the whole thing better, basically, is kind of how I look at it. But
I do agree. I do like that they've done some things. I think it's more the public narrative and what we are talking about as a people, right? That, of course, we are not people and legislator and we can't create these laws, but it doesn't mean that we don't get to decide what the narrative is. And I think that we're just allowing a lot of Republicans or right-wing extremists to control what that narrative is. And I wish that we would choose what's important to talk about instead of whatever they think and just rebutting whatever they say. I'm not here for the back and forth argument to prove who's right. I want to figure out what's going on and why. I want to figure out the real problem of what's happening. And I don't care if I'm right or not. I just want us to work together to do that. And because there's so much more political polarity than there's ever been in American history, I think it's difficult to do so because there's no common understanding anymore. There's no even trying to understand. It's so extreme on, you could say both, either side, that it gets difficult to come to that mutual understanding. And I just wish there was a way that we could kind of get past some of those differences and maybe have real discussions about these things, real issues, right? Because at the end of the day, regardless of, your political thoughts or party, I'd argue that we are all Americans dealing with a lot of the same stuff. We're all middle-class Americans struggling with the same things. We have a lot more in common than we think we do. And I wish that, it doesn't mean you have to be best buddies with somebody on the opposite side, but I do think that I wish that we could come to some understanding where it could be some real discussion instead of just debates and arguments all the time, because that's all I'm seeing when it comes to discourse from either side is, I'm right. No, I'm right. And it's like, hang on, I don't care who's right. Let's focus on what we can actually do to solve the problem that all of us are dealing with right now. We're all struggling with the same things. right? So although I do know we disagree with the way to do it, I do think that we need to realize we have a little bit more understanding than we do. Although I do understand, like obviously if people are extremists, you don't need to go out of your way to prove it, right? I mean, they believe what they believe, and you're not going to convince them that they're morally wrong. So I don't know. That's my 2 cents.
Actually, that brought up something that I actually am curious to hear your guys' thoughts on. Last semester, there was a lot of, I guess, anti-trans rhetoric, from the right and all that sort of thing. And there was actually a lot of trans members of the WSU Democrats. And we did it's kind of like a counter protest, because on the Trans Day of Remembrance, they set up a table with a bunch of propaganda on it, just basically saying that, it's like the day of detransition is what they put on there, and how some trans people regret being trans or regret the surgeries and all that kind of stuff. And, the members, they wanted to protest, and I was like, yeah, that's completely fine. I mean, on the day where they literally remember trans people who got assaulted and murdered, you're going to do that. So we did, but there was a little bit of disagreement among the members of if we should actually talk to the other side. If someone comes up and they want to say, oh, I don't support trans people, should you engage in the conversation? Obviously, if it's a troll, maybe not. But there were some people who wanted to talk to the other side. There were some who's like, I'm not debating my rights, and they see it as a bad thing to even debate your rights at all. But it kind of puts me in a weird position, because I'm like, should I tell them not to engage? But that doesn't sound right to me, as far as finding truth together. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Was that here that
they were
setting that up? Really?
Yep. The Young Americans for Freedom.
Wow.
Freedom to go into your bedroom.
I absolutely have thoughts on this. I think that for many people, and we're recognizing this, that not many people are willing to be open to changing their minds. So if a person is willing to be open to changing their minds, I'll call this self-reflection, to be able to reflect on their thoughts, to reflect on their actions, to be able to move forward. Otherwise, we're stuck in dogmatism, arguing our same points, and we're not going to get anywhere. And the same thing can be said for any one of us, that we might be trenchant in the things that we believe. So I think if there's and this is not even something that can be said via words. This can also be something that is indicated through body language and so on, through one's actions. There are ways to tell beyond language whether someone's acting in good faith. So I do think there's a way in which we can understand that many people can be coming with curious, good faith questions. But often, a lot of times, I believe that some of these questions just boil down to, I can't remember the name. It's like sea lining. It's just asking questions just to provoke. And then, oh, how dare you for reacting to my simple questions? You must those tolerant leftists and so on.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think when it's about topics that hit so close to home for some people, and it's when emotions get in the way, nothing really good happens from that. On both sides, and I think that's why the administration is bringing the most controversial topics to light, is because it just continues to divide us even more.
I have some just questions here. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on and why. Should there be term limits for Congress?
Yes.
Based.
Yes, I agree.
I also agree.
You do not let these crusty politicians be staying in there for too long. It's crazy.
I think that's especially important when nowadays, I hate to say it, but your vote doesn't matter as much or make as much of a difference as it did before. And so I think because of that, term limits would especially be important.
I agree. I definitely agree. I think many people are in there and they're too old, and because they have incumbency, they're more likely to win re-election. Well, they're almost definitely going to win their party's primary unless they do something crazy like Eric Adams or something.
I very much agree with your thoughts that it's very important to focus on policies where people can tangibly see and feel and maybe even taste the benefits. Otherwise, we're just kind of talking about ideas, which are so abstract. And it's more cultural issues that, while important, there are many things that people literally need to eat, breathe, and live. And so focusing on these material interests, I find to be very important. And insofar as, having term limits can, enable people to be better represented, finding a more diverse group of people who can be represented. And I'm not just saying this for Democrats. I'm saying this for Republicans too. If we have term limits, Republicans too will find people who better represent them.
Preach. Yeah, now I remember what I was going to say. Like, if you're an incumbent, whether a Republican or a Democrat, you're more likely to win or your primary. And then if you're the incumbent, especially in Congress, you then have the likelihood of winning is higher. So I definitely agree that we should have term limits so they're not just writing out, the advantage they have when they could be getting better representatives. So, yeah. Next question. Voting age, should it be lowered, raised, or stay the same?
I think personally it should stay the same. You become officially an adult. You can now buy your own house if you had the money. You can make a lot of these decisions. You should be able to decide who represents you and how you live your life. Although if you want to challenge me, I'm okay with that too.
I think I agree with that for sure, but I think it's not necessarily about changing the voting age, but educating voters. I see, comments on random posts here and there. Someone did or said something stupid, and someone will say, this person has an equal amount of voting power as you, which is just really disturbing to me. And people they aren't educated. They don't have to know anything. They just get their ballot in the mail, and they write down what their friends say, what their parents say, what they see online. And I think an educated public is how a democracy really functions efficiently. And oligarchs and people like that come to power with public who believes in fake news and doesn't do their own research or their own critical thinking. And so I think just focusing more on not necessarily the voting age, but teaching people how to ask questions and find evidence and find their sources and then respectfully debate with others.
I agree. I'm curious though, because I know, I think young men, they skew conservative. I'm not sure young men compared to older men, and then I know that the women skew left. But if we did lower the voting age to 16, I wonder statistically who that would benefit. If there'd be a bunch of Charlie Kirk or Andrew Tate, debate bros who are younger than that, who have found the alt-right pipeline. A lot of them would vote for the Republican, but then again, you have a lot of women. And in general, it just seems like the younger population, even with some men in there, oftentimes you can still get people like us and all that kind of thing. Don't mean to misgender anyone, but sorry. But
I do agree, though. I think lack of education and propaganda, misinformation, are the main ways that we become so politically polarized. So I'm just kind of building off of your point, but lack of education, I realized, is one of the key issues. I'm a substitute teacher, and the amount of times that 7th graders don't even know basic fractions and just basic, literacy skills, it's actually becoming quite scary. And I hear this from a lot of other teachers. It's not just me, but online forums, teachers around me that I work with. Children are increasingly becoming illiterate. They're increasingly, just not having the knowledge that they need that's required at that age. And we see that, adult literacy rates have been dropping since 2019. And do I think that's a little bit of a coincidence right before, insanely, racist regimes start to take place, racist ideas, that I do think it kind of goes hand in hand, that lack of education is the primary factor in allowing propaganda to affect our public.
Immediately for myself, I'm less certain. But there's one thing I do know. I do know that I believe that not just critical discourse and, comprehensive thinking skills, but I also think emotional intelligence is very important. I believe that empathy is a skill. It's something that, while admittedly some people lack, I think being able to practice empathy, being able to put yourself in other people's shoes, being able to see how people to name your emotions. And I say this as a man, to name your emotions, to be able to name not just your emotions, but maybe the emotions of the other person, but also like the patterns of behavior that you're engaged in, patterns of arguments, patterns of behavior that more or less problematic or bad faith and so on. I think this, in addition to education, and I know there's a study somewhere that talks about this, being a benefit to namely progressive voters. But the point I want to get across here is that this, I would also add emotional intelligence and emotional thinking skills as well. I think this would be very important. As for myself and voting age, there's lots of different debates that I am currently debating. I don't really want to get into that, but that's my thoughts there.
Yeah, I feel that. I'm kind of there too. I'd want to see maybe statistically how it would affect it if you lowered it to 16. Because I do think that a lot of 16-year-olds, like, they are smart enough to be able to vote and make a good decision. Some of them obviously not. But yeah, I don't know. I could go either way. I think right now I'd probably be more neutral, and so like having it stay the same. I know that there's a lot of talk online, like, yeah, 18 is a normal adult, but then there's a big debate right now about whether the age of being able to create adult content should be raised from 18 to 21. It's like, if you're going to raise that to 21, like, why don't you raise the voting age to 21? I don't know.
I think younger voters are far too impressionable to be able to vote. You know, when you get the main points, the main issues with voting, I would say are fake news and not being able to do your own research and just being mature enough to really go out and find an argument. And I think at that age you could have so many voters that could very quickly from month to month flip their opinion on a big topic. And I think voting should represent what you really believe in, and especially the big issues. I don't think, if you really know what you're talking about, I don't think you should sway a huge amount. So I think, I think with younger voters, I think they would most likely just vote on whatever their parents say and do less of their own thinking.
I've been thinking more on this, so allow me to share my thoughts here. And my thoughts here is generally one in which the question I'm considering is one in which, the voting age is not necessarily tied to what is considered to be, a mature human being, but one that instead considers personhood, that this person has the capacity to be represented in a political function. I think of this in terms of discourse regarding children who are seen as a demographic that is in many institutions and in social functions, outside of power itself and unable to influence the world in which they want to be a part of, or we might say our betterment, and in many ways they would articulate to their detriment because the world is decided without them. And so the thought experiment I'm having right now is considering the voting age not being related to a mature human being, but rather personhood, because otherwise there's a demographic of people who do not have the capacity to be represented in a political function. Not to mention the other demographics who are not represented in a political function. And this does a disservice to them. Instead, I think by extending this to personhood, there's a greater capacity for honoring each and every person. And there's precedent in other societies for doing this. I think of, namely, indigenous societies, for example, where even the youngest can take a position in facilitating, delegating tasks. And I'm not going to get into it, but
that's a good point. I've heard the distinction between adulthood and personhood, but that's a good point for who should be capable of making these kinds of decisions. I wrote Electoral College, keep it or get rid of it. Well, actually, I do want to talk about this because I know you all would probably say we should eliminate the Electoral College, but I have an idea where instead of having 100 Senate seats and 2 senators for each state, what if we just had it more like the House of Representatives, where except you don't care about state boundaries and you just drew 100 equally populated Senate districts? I've always thought about that. I think that would be so much better than having fucking Wyoming with like 600,000 people, 2 senators, and California has 2 senators. Like, I feel like it should all be the same, but I'm curious, what do you guys think about that?
I do agree. I do think equal representation is very important. I think most people I know within the political sphere would say something along the lines of that they don't like the Electoral College. And I think it's more because it feels less like you're directly being represented and more that, you know, it's not doing as much as you'd want it to do, right? It's just not as effective as you wish it would be. And I think the Electoral College is one of those big obstacles for that.
I think that has become, it's always been kind of a debate, but I think more recently it's kind of come to light more because I would say, I haven't done a ton of research into this, so correct me if I'm wrong, but in the past, I'd say more often than not, the president wins both the popular vote and the Electoral College. And I think when you have someone who wins the Electoral College and not the popular vote, it really just kind of makes you question the whole system. But I think maybe it's not really, talked about as much when they win both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like Democrats still saying we should end the Electoral College after 2024, which Trump technically did win the popular vote. They typically win both. And the thing is, when people say that Trump won the popular vote by, what was it, like 1 million or something like that. But Joe Biden won the popular vote by like 7 million. And they don't take that as the truth. And I'm pretty sure 2024 they had a lower turnout rate than 2020. At least I'm pretty sure. So it's like that also had a huge effect on the results of the election. But yeah. Public financing of elections, yay or nay?
What do you mean by public financing?
So like taxpayers' money is used to fund campaigns rather than private, like with the Citizens United ruling, how now corporations, their money is seen as free speech basically. So they could just donate to any, whereas if we had public funding, it would be a lot more like equal for each candidate. Sorry, I don't know why I keep doing that.
I am personally not a fan of most lobbying and interest groups. I've always found that lobbying is just legal bribing, which is exactly what it is, right? So how come these interests of these ultra wealthy corporations, like pesticide companies and oil companies, they get to decide which laws should be put in place regardless of the good for the people? And like I said, I think that a true democratic republic is the people deciding these things, right? Which laws and policies they think are the most important. So, not to say that there aren't some interest groups that have good intentions or might be good companies, but I think that the bad outweighs the good almost most of the time when it comes to lobbying. So I would love to see public funding. I think that we would see a lot more accurate representation of our people instead of corporations getting the majority of the vote.
I agree with that very much. I think that could possibly have the impact of people in general just getting more involved in the voting process, because they're essentially paying for it in a way. They would feel like it's less up to the rich corporations to bribe whoever they want and more in their hands if they're actively paying for it. I think that could increase voter turnout, which would be great.
Last question is kind of about the social media influence on politics, and this is this is something that our governor, Spencer Cox, this is what he loves to talk about, is the social media influence on kids and different stuff like this. So he's always talking about that. But I was curious, with social media influence on politics, especially with the rise of AI, what do you think we should do? Should we ban political ads? Should we regulate algorithms to make sure there's no AI political things coming out? And in that case, couldn't you target someone who wasn't using AI accidentally? It's just interesting. Should we ban political ads? Should we regulate algorithms? What kind of social media influence on politics should there be, or what's the right situation here?
I think AI should be heavily regulated, much more. You know, a lot of these big AI CEOs, they're prioritizing speed over everything else, and growth and profit over morality and a lot of the things that matter. You know, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, which owns ChatGPT, he was asked if AI would bring the end of humanity, and he said, "Yeah, I think it would, but in the meantime," and the fact that he's acknowledging that is kind of crazy. And I also think that AI has, you know, just with fake news, and AI is getting so good now. It's so accurate, and people will see something and just take it as true, and that can totally affect the political spectrum. And I don't know if either of you saw the president's address to the nation after the Charlie Kirk murder. That video is AI.
Really?
Yeah, if you go and look at it, you know, his hands like move weird, and it's very obvious it's AI. It's subtle, but it's obvious if you look. You know, I watched the whole video, and I didn't watch it closely, but I didn't think anything, and then it started coming up after the fact, and obviously they haven't addressed it because they don't want to bring attention to it, but it just feels such a like dystopian feeling that's like a real case where the president generated an AI video of himself, and he's also been posting, you know, when you went to the UK, a bunch of his pictures, you can clearly tell it's so obvious. He like an edited smile on his face. It's not his real teeth. It's really bad.
Dang, I keep on wanting to say something right when I'm about to say it, I forget. Like, what the hell? Oh yeah, with AI, like there's even these dumb videos online where it shows like a snake is like about to eat a dog, and then like the owner like saves the dog from the snake, and then you'll see comments from like older people and some even just normal people like, "Oh, I hate snakes. I'm glad he's okay." And I'm like, bro, what the? It's like you got duped by that. But then again, with it becoming so much more realistic, you can imagine so many more people are just going to get duped, and the line between reality and fiction is just not going to be there anymore. It's going to become increasingly hard to find.
Yeah, when people our age find it hard to tell, you can imagine the older generations. It's just... Yeah.
I do think that a lot of a responsibility lies with the social media companies, the corporations that are allowing these biases, these, there's a specific word, echo chambers. They're allowing echo chambers to happen, which is basically, if you don't know, it's that people, you know, interact with the algorithm, and then their political ideas tend to be regurgitated back to them again and again, because that's what you interact with and that's what you like. And then you continue to only see things from your side of view, and you'll never see any other challenging ideas. So it further makes your view more extremist than it's ever been. And I do think that it lies with the social media companies to make sure that their algorithms are not allowing things like this. Although I do want to say that we should be careful when we're talking about government censorship. That can be a really slippery slope, and that's why I think that the government shouldn't be involved in anything that has to do with free speech, just because that can turn bad really quick. And we're already seeing the government take more control than they need to, so I wouldn't want to give them another thing that they can capitalize off of.
Good point.
Yeah, it should certainly be left up to the companies themselves.
So since we've gone over the hour mark, does any of you have any last thoughts before we wrap this up?
I don't know if this is too controversial to add in there, but I wanted to kind of talk about gun rights and laws. I think that a lot of people have started to shift their views on gun laws, and I think that I tend to have a bit of a unique view for someone that's kind of left-leaning that I don't see represented very often. And don't get me wrong, I 100% agree. Like, I understand why people would want gun regulations. There's a lot of innocent lives being taken at a systemic level that shouldn't be happening, absolutely. But I also think as a political science major, I learn a lot about history and the reason our Constitution was created and why and things like that. And I understand why our founding fathers created the Second Amendment. It was specifically to fight against tyranny, right? So I think that although I do agree that, some regulations should take place, I do want people to be careful with how hard they're going on getting rid of guns, because that is our last measure to fight against a tyrannical government. And where we're seeing it happen in real time right now, do we really want that to happen right now when that's one of our last forms of power, right?
Sorry.
But again, I do understand that, there's a lot of innocent lives lost. And again, as a substitute teacher, I see what it does to kids. I see how scared they are to enter school. I mean, sometimes I am too. I'm at a school every day, whether as a student or a teacher. And so I can understand why it would be scary and why people would want to regulate guns. But I just want to remind people why the Second Amendment was created and what it was for.
Do you think that teachers should be armed in school, or at least should have the option?
I think that runs into more problems. I think a lot with student safety and how they personally feel comfortable with things like that. I do know, though, that my professor having a gun the other day did make me feel safer, knowing that he knew how to use a gun, and that if something were to happen, that I have an armed teacher in the room with me that could protect me.
Your professor has a gun?
Yes, it's he's the Roy Chief of Police, Matthew Gwynn, and he's a pretty interesting professor. He makes things interesting, but when he was wearing the gun, I'm not going to lie to you, I felt safer with him being there. I know that university shootings have been happening, and Utah is no exception to this. And having an armed person in my classroom, especially my professor that I know knows how to use a gun and has been using one for a long time, it made me feel incredibly safe. It made me feel like, I don't have to worry about shootings happening or problems happening when it comes to gun violence.
I think there's some situations like that where I probably would be the same as you, would just feel fine with it. But in some situations, with how statistically how rare school shootings are, I'd be more likely to not want them to have guns, because I think it might be more likely that they'd use it on a student or something like that. There's been some times where professors, there was one here at this university where I went up and I went into his class, and this dude that was sitting, close to the front, he put a headphone in, and then the teacher was like, what are you doing? Why are you putting that headphone in? You're trying to listen to music? What? And he was getting so pissed off about it, to the point where I was like, dang, it's I would not want him to have a gun. But then again, if people who are unhinged like that, they probably shouldn't be working as professors in general. But yeah, it's kind of a slippery slope, because in a situation where they would need it and they used it, then everyone would be like, oh, thank God they had it. But then in a different situation where maybe even the kid gets the gun, or or they use it on a kid or something like that, then you would be wishing that wasn't in place. But yeah, any last thoughts before we end this?
I agree with your point that in the right hands, it's absolutely a great option. And, for a lot of reasons, school shooters will think twice. It makes it a lot harder, and definitely makes you feel safer. But I think the process of making sure it's in the right hands, and the process of getting the right training, make sure you're in the right mindset and all of that stuff, I think that's where it gets tricky. And it'd be really hard to get a lot of professors that you would say the same about.
Right. And I do think it's different with public schools, with younger children. There are a lot more factors than when it's adults with other adults, right? It's I feel like less of a scary issue when it comes to things like that. But I think it's more focusing on the root of the issue as well. I think that putting a Band-Aid solution on gun violence is not the answer. I think that the root of a problem is our culture and how we view a lot of things, our political system. There's a lot of things that contribute to gun violence that I think, even mental illness, right? There are a lot of other factors that contribute to it, and I think we need to focus a little more on the root of the issue than Band-Aid solutions that could end up doing more harm than good.
Good point. Anything else, or are we all good?
Good.
All right. Well, thanks for watching. This has been our first podcast of the semester. Thanks to everyone who contributed, and hope y'all have a nice day or night, everybody. See you later.